In this lesson, we're going to discuss outside-the-box thinking with grids. If you'd like to follow along, go under your File menu to New, Document, and let's set up 3 pages. They don't need to be facing pages. And let's make the orientation landscape. And just click OK. One of my favorite features when InDesign CS5 first came out was Gridify. Why don't we see what it's all about? Go to your rectangle tool. If you can't find it, just hit your M key. It will go right there. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner of my margins and just drag all the way down to the lower right corner of my margins. Then, without letting go of my mouse, I'm going to hit my up arrow. And you can see that it's dividing the rectangle into rows. If I hit my right arrow, it's going to make columns. If I hit my left arrow, it's going to decrease the number of columns by 1 each time. And the same thing is true of my rows. If I hit my down arrow, it's going to decrease the number of rows. Let me hit my up arrow again. So I end up with 9 rectangles in a perfect grid, fitting perfectly to my margins as soon as I let go. Let me hit delete. Wouldn't it be great if I could place images in a grid? Well, that's another part of Gridify. If I open Mini Bridge, I need to select the images that I want to place from Mini Bridge. I'm going to click on that first image. Then I'm going to add an additional 8 images to that original by holding down my Shift key and clicking again. Now, to place the images, all I need to do is click on any one of the selected images and just drag it into my layout and let go. This is going to load all of those images from www.photospin.com into what's called a loaded brush. We will be talking more about placing images in an upcoming lesson. Now, how do I place all of these images into a grid? Well, first, let me get my mini bridge out of the way just by clicking the little X. And I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner of my margins and just click and drag all the way down to the lower right corner of my margins. Now, like the other Gridify feature that I showed you earlier, now all I have to do to make rows is hit my up arrow. If I wanted to make less rows, I would hit my down arrow. To add columns, I would click my right arrow. The more times I click, the more columns I'll have. If I were to hit my left arrow, I'm decreasing the number of columns. I'm going to click the right arrow so that I have 9 rectangles. And when I let go, the images are placed in each one of those rectangles. Now, the way it's placing by default is the entire image is fitting within that rectangle. So if I wanted to change the cropping or the size, I could do that afterwards. Very cool. Let me scroll down to the next page. What if I wanted to make a grid of polygons or circles or stars? Well, I can do that just by clicking down on my rectangle. I'm going to go to the ellipse tool. Why don't we do ellipses? I'm going to go once again to that upper left-hand corner of my margins and just click and drag all the way down to the lower right margin. Without letting go of my mouse button, I'm going to click the up arrow. And you can see I'm getting more and more rows. If I hit my down arrow, I'm getting less and less rows. Let me hit my right arrow to add columns. If I hit my left arrow, I get less columns. Really kind of cool. As soon as I let go, I have ellipses that are filling my margins. Something that would not be all that easy to do without the Gridify feature. Let's continue talking about grids. I'm going to delete all of these objects, and I'm going to turn on my document grid. I'm going to go under the View menu to Grids and Guides, Show Document Grid. And you'll remember that when we were talking about preferences, we talked about the document grid. If it doesn't have the right number of subdivisions in your grid, you can go to your preferences by pressing Command K or Control K, and then going to the grid section to change the number of subdivisions. We're going to leave it as it is. The way I have this right now, I'm really only using half of the document grid feature. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm just going to click anywhere and start to drag, and you can see I'm making ellipses. If I were to use it this way, I'm doing it by eye, not a very accurate way to work on a computer screen. So let me hit delete. I'm going to go under my view menu once again to grids and guides and choose snap to document grid. Now watch what happens if I click and drag. Let me do that again. It is actually snapping right to those grid lines as I get close to them. So I can be sure that what I'm making are perfect circles that are exactly the same size. Now, this can be extremely useful when working on a grid-based layout. But a word of caution. I'm going to turn off my grid. I'm going to go into the View menu to Grids and Guides, and I'm going to go to Hide Document Grid. So I can no longer see my grid. But look at this very unusual behavior. It's still snapping right to my document grid. Now I know some people like using document grid without being able to see it, but most people don't like it. It's kind of strange the way the objects are being drawn, where they keep jerking and snapping to non-existent grid lines. So to turn it off, go under your View menu to Grids and Guides and uncheck Snap to Document Grid. Now it's going to work normally again. Let me scroll down to my last page. I'm going to go back to my Rectangle tool. So click down on the ellipse and go to Rectangle tool, or just hit your M key. And let me scroll up just a little bit. I'm going to draw a rectangle that starts in the upper left-hand corner of my margins and goes all the way down to the lower right-hand corner. Another way that you can create a grid is using scripts. Now, most of the time when I say scripts, I can hear all of the artists cringing because they may not be scripters. The good news is there are a lot of scripts that come with InDesign, so you don't have to worry about being a scripter. To open your Scripts panel, go under the Window menu to Utilities, Scripts. There are bunches of scripts that come with InDesign. What I want you to do is go in the sample files, click the little disclosure arrow, and then next to JavaScript, click the little disclosure arrow there as well. And there's a terrific script called Make Grid. If I double click on that, it's going to open a dialog box. And I just have to answer some questions. How many rows do I want? How many columns do I want? So I'm going to type 3 next to rows and 3 next to columns. I'm going to leave row gutter and column gutter as it is at 12 points. That's the distance between the rectangles that it's going to create. What kind of frames do I want? Unassigned, text, or graphic? If I want to place images in these frames, I'm probably going to choose graphic. Do I want to retain the formatting and content within my rectangle? Well, at this point, there is no formatting or content. So it doesn't matter whether that's checked or not. Do I want to delete the original object? If I do, I want to leave this checked. And then I'm just going to click OK. And I created an instant grid in a matter of seconds. But what if I wanted guides around my grid? Well, first I have to go to my selection tool and just click and drag to select all of my rectangles. Now, if I double click on the Add Guides script, it's going to open a dialog basically with some questions. Where do I want my guides? Add guides at top. So the top of each object, the left, the bottom, the right. Do I want a horizontal center guide, which will put a guide at the center of each object? I don't think so. Do I want a guide at the vertical center? How about no? What do I want my guides around? Each object, which it is by default, or the entire selection, which would put guides only around the edges of the selection? I want each object. And then all I have to do is click OK. And it's going to create guides to the edges of each one of these rectangles. So that can save a whole bunch of time. But let me close my scripts, and I'm just going to delete all of these objects. Then I'm going to select all of my guides just by clicking and dragging across them with my selection tool and hit delete. What if I wanted to create guides in a grid, but I didn't have any objects yet? I was going to use the guides to create the objects nicely within a grid. Well, if I go under my layout menu to create guides, you'll see a very similar dialog box that we just saw in the scripts. How many rows of guides do I want? I'm going to go to columns, and I want 3 columns. And what do I want the gutter to be? I'm going to leave it at 1 pica. That's a good amount. If I wanted to increase it, I could click the up arrow. The gutter is the distance between the guides in your grid. In the options section, do I want to fit the guides to the margins? I could also fit them to the page itself. So I have 9 sections, 9 equal sections filling the page. I'm going to go back to margins so you can see I now have those 9 equal sections filling the margins. And then all I have to do is click OK. We're going to be talking more about layouts in the upcoming lesson.